What's your best idiot neighbor story? My dad had a neighbor when he was young that played his radio loudly all day. Even when he wasn't home or was gone on vacation. Every time he left the house and his radio was still on, my dad would go and trip the circuit breaker to his condo. One day he sees my dad, who was an electrical engineer, and asked him why his breaker kept tripping. Was it faulty wiring? No. My dad explained. The loud radio was probably just putting too much strain on the circuit when left on all the time. My dad suggested he should try turning it down or off when he wasn't home, and see if that fixed it. So the man tried it. And surprise surprise, the circuit breaker stopped tripping. He was very thankful to my dad for helping him with that annoying electrical issue. Neighbor dug a hole in our side yard because she needed dirt. Both of us live on an acre of land. Guess you'll have to find some dirt to fill that hole in with. Wonder where you could get some of that? The best part about this was I found it mowing the lawn and I thought I fractured my ankle and my parents were mad at me for digging a hole. Couple that lives across the hall from me fights often and loudly. One night, the girl found something on the guy's phone that she found objectionable, either PRN or evidence of cheating. Either way she was yelling a lot about skanks and SLTS, so she throws his phone off the second floor balcony onto the concrete walkway below where it shatters. Guy then goes back inside, grabs her phone and does the same. Moral of the story is, iPhone for an iPhone makes the whole world entertaining for the neighbors. My constantly drunk neighbor came up with the brilliant idea that he could collect the leaves in the stone parking lot with his snowblower. He duct taped a plastic garbage bag over the discharge chute. And off he goes. It actually inflated the bag for a few moments until the stones started flying. He broke 3 windows on his garage door and splattered a bunch of cars in the lot. Shti my britches laughing. I could write a book on all the stupid shti I saw him do. Neighbor has a teenage son. 2 years my junior who's an idiot. Got a used car for his birthday and decided to paint it neon green. Okay. One night he comes home, drunk, and proceeds to crash into my dad's car parked outside. Decides to hide it, poorly, and the next morning claims it wasn't him. We probably would have believed him had the damage on my dad's car not had a neon green paint swap to it. Ducking moron. Edit. Have gotten a few replies asking what 2 years my junior means. Basically it means he's 2 years younger than me. We lived next to this big guy in an apartment building, front doors inside a hallway. Now, he was a nice enough guy, but he was always cleaning a puddle up in front of his apartment every other day. We'd always ask him if everything was alright, and he'd talk some incoherent crap about how he hates management. So, out of curiosity, I asked management when I happened to be in the rental office, and the lady rolls her eyes and says, "This idiot fills up his tub to the brim and sits his fat ass in the tub. The water, of course, floods his entire apartment and comes out into the hallway. And this idiot has the balls to blame us somehow." I pretty much said, "Geez. Sounds rough," and scurried on back to my place. If the tub story is really the truth, this guy must be dumb as rocks. I watched my across the street neighbor cut his 3/4 acre lawn entirely with an electric weed whacker because he didn't have time to drive a mile to get gas for his lawnmower. I kid you not. This one dude in my neighborhood let his grass get so tall that he couldn't use a lawnmower on it. Was driving one day and saw the ducker with a weed whacker going at grass taller than him. I own about 8 acres. The house next to me has a right-of-way drive that goes through it. A couple bought the house about 10 years ago. One day they were down near the mailboxes planting some plants. I went down and very nicely told them that what they had done was fine, but in the future before they do anything on my property they need to ask me first. He argued with me that they had rights to all of the property on 35 feet at each side of the right-of-way. I explained to him that this just wasn't true. They haven't spoken to me since and won't even return my wave when I wave at them. If they want to be mad at someone, it is the agent who sold them the house, not me. Our neighbor is a strange woman with a lot of strange habits. For example, she waters her plants even when it's raining outside. And she complains about ice cream being cold, so she microwaves it first. My grandmother had a neighbor who would water her flowers every day, rain or shine. My grandmother liked to watch and cackle gleefully because the woman was convinced that her careful watering was the reason her flowers were so much better than everyone else's. She would brag at the clubhouse how her flowers were always in bloom, even in winter. My grandmother never told her that they were always in bloom was because they were fake flowers. I was an idiot neighbor. Or a crazy one. When my son was a newborn, he was very colicky and barely slept for more than a few hours at a time. I was so tired and literally losing my mind. There was a house of old bikers down the street and they would constantly drive down our road and rev their engines. I mean, my husband's rides. I know it is possible to drive down the street and rattle windows. It would wake the baby up. So I went down there and asked very nicely. I said, "Hey guys. I know it's your street too. But I have a young baby who you wake up every time you do that. Can you guys just not rev your engines on the street?" They seemed super cool about it and I was so thankful. But it made it worse, not better. Now it was like a game to really rev when they went by my house. It became like the telltale heart and started to drive me mad. Every time I heard it I became one step closer to buying a machine gun and mowing them down. I became completely irrational one day and stormed down the street. I burst into their backyard where they were hanging and yelled at them like a crazy person. Threatened to kick their asses. Call the cops. Slash their tires. Whatever it took for them to stop ducking revving their engines. It finally stopped, but I am still embarrassed by how crazy I acted. Sleep deprivation is a hell of a drug. Our neighbors have a second kitchen in the basement that they use for everything. So the actual kitchen won't look used or dirty. Edit. They are Germans. Living in Germany. It's definitely not normal here. That's actually genius. I need a whole other house as a show house for visitors. One without all the kids' toys in. This used to be a thing mostly in Italian families that did a lot of cooking. Not so much anymore. The upstairs kitchen was for gathering or visiting. If your family member had a downstairs kitchen, you knew you could pretty much stop in whenever and there would be food to eat. A neighbor messed up when building a home and put his entire home well within my property. Large piece of land with 2 huge clearings connected to 2 roads but separated by a large isthmus of trees. I didn't notice because I had taken an 8-month vacation right after he started building. Huge property. I didn't go around and inspect it often. So I got a real estate lawyer and surveyors to confirm it was in my property. I was going to sell him that clearing for a good price until I went to talk to him and he was the biggest Ashley I had ever met. He essentially told me that he is going to sue me for leading him on despite the fact that I did not know him nor did I meet him before that day. His wife flipped my girlfriend and I as we were pulling out of their driveway. 4 months later, I file a lawsuit saying he must destroy the property or turn it over to me immediately. It would have cost him more to demolish it and return the site to original condition, so he signed the house over to me. He was still out for construction costs. I was living in a single wide with my girlfriend. Then I had brand new 2,600 square FT house with all the hookups for water, electric, and cable for free. Got the land for next to nothing. Sold it for almost 50 times the value. I live on a 50+ acre New England farm. About 2/3 of it is wooded. After I'd been here for about a year, I was walking the boundary stone wall. About 10 feet on my side of the land. From a neighbor's yard I hear a bellowing voice. "You'd better not be on my land." I replied, "I'm not. I'm on my own land." He yells back. "From somewhere in the trees on his side, just so you know. Never stop foot on my land." Me. "Okay. I've got a deal. And you stay off mine." "Okay." I hear a grunt. Then I ask, "By the way, is this your deer hunting tree stand on my side of the wall?" At which point he exploded, "That stand has been there for 10 years. TLDR. Dumbus picks a fight for absolutely no reason and ends up agreeing to not trespass on my land. And had been trespassing for a decade. We have a grandma next door who is raising her 3 grandchildren. They are complete teenage idiots. They got in trouble for stealing from our neighbors. The kids would offer to cut their grass and ask to use their bathroom when they were done. Then they would steal medication from the bathroom. It was extremely obvious who stole medication. They pulled the scam up and down the block. Wasn't too hard to put it together. Edit to add. 2 of the grandkids are in juvie. They stole a crazy expensive car from a very wealthy neighborhood nearby. And they crashed the car. I feel bad for everyone in this situation. Those kids are dumb as duck. But if my parents hadn't been around to beat my ass when I did dumb shit, I would probably have a pretty significant criminal record. And it sucks for the grandma who probably has a hard time handling 3 grandchildren who obviously had a shitty childhood. Otherwise they'd probably still be with their parents. I mean, it blows you and your neighbors have to deal with that. But in that situation, everyone loses. When I lived with my parents, we had a knock at the door one day from our neighbors across the road. They told us a story that resulted in their car getting stolen the night before. Apparently, the wife had seen a strange looking man wandering around the street late at night. He had apparently been looking into car windows which were parked on driveways, including our cars. The next morning, their BMW was gone, including the keys which were hanging by the front door of their house. They assumed the strange man looking in car windows had somehow fished the keys from the house via the letterbox. The whole thing sounded very strange. To not call the police when a man is literally peering through car windows on people's driveways was strange enough. Months later, the neighbors got a divorce and sold their house. Turns out, they'd made the whole thing up and had dumped the car for the insurance, as they had fallen on hard times. Apparently, their shitty story hadn't held up well, and they were found out. Who broadcasts a story like that? Why make yourself look stupid for not calling the police when seeing a strange man eyeing up cars? Then tell all the neighbors about the man? Neighbor after someone had attempted to steal his bike and being advised by me to get a better lock, proceeds to save his time by not locking his bike up at all but balancing the lock so that it looked like his bike was locked up unless you actually looked at it for a few seconds. I warned him that someone had already tried to steal his bike and that it wasn't really clever leaving it unlocked like that. He says, "I promise you I'll lock it up." Why he's promising me anything I have no idea. I was just being neighborly. He then leaves his bike unlocked like that for about a week until someone stole it. I guess it did save the thief time. Edit. He did exactly the same thing again. About 2 months after his first bike was stolen, he left another bike out unlocked for weeks and it was stolen. Edit. No one is going to read this, but duck me, he did it a 3rd time. I have crazy neighbors. They are actually very nice as neighbors go. But the family is totally dysfunctional. They have 2 grown-up daughters living there, along with their teenage daughters and their boyfriends. One has a kid. There are roughly 10 people living there ranging from 5 to 70. They keep the yard mowed and keep to themselves mostly. But they are batshit insane. I like them actually for 2 reasons. First, they are notorious and crazy around our town, so everyone leaves them alone. So little crime around us. Second, they are entertainment. One morning my aunt was visiting. We are on the front porch and I am telling her about all the neighbors. I was telling her a story about how one of the younger granddaughters gets in a fight with her boyfriend at 2 AM on a Tuesday night. They are screaming at each other, walking up and down the street, explaining that something like that happens once a week. Like clockwork. One of the daughters comes out screaming back at someone and gets in her car. Her daughter comes out and tries to stop her from backing out. She grabs a shovel from the back of the truck and starts hitting the front windshield of the car, shattering it. They call the cops. Meanwhile, the granddaughter with the shovel calls her bio dad who lives down the road. He picks his daughter up. 2 minutes later the cops show up. But she is gone. I have hundreds like this. Our neighbor homeschooled his kids and would always brag about how his children were geniuses with perfect scores on all the standardized tests. Sure, they got a 1600 1600 on the SAT, but he would never let them play with us and washed masses. 20 years later, his kids are still living at home and all of them lack the social skills to make connections and get a job. Book smarts will only get you so far. Back in high school, one of our neighbors moved away and their house sold to this older woman and her mostly grown sons. She was a strange one. She cut down every tree on her property because of the bad spirits in them. The sons seemed to be popular, having people drop by at all hours. All was relatively quiet until one day, while I was home alone, there was a knock on the door. Two gentlemen in very nice black suits and dark ties then identified themselves as FBI and asked me if we were ever approached by crazy lady or her sons to buy anything. I basically replied with they are crazy and we don't talk to them. They don't talk to us. They hand me their business card then proceed on to the next house. I look out the window and I see 5 blue Ford Tauruses, 3 red Ford Astro vans, and 1 Viacom truck that was being loaded with box after box from the neighbor's garage. Turns out the sons were making those special cable boxes that got you all of the channels for free. After this it was only the strange lady left in that house. During Hurricane Sandy, my street was without power, heat or hot water for 14 days. It was unbearably cold in the house, and at night we could see our breath because it would get down in the 20s-30s. I have the west wing of the house to myself. There is a family that lives in the house proper, and another tenant in the small studio in between us. I come home from work one day to just swing by the house and get clothes so I can shower at a friend's. And my road is blocked off. Fire engines and cops everywhere. My neighbor approaches me as I'm making my way up the street through the craziness and I asked whose house it was. He said, "Oh, it's yours." Immediately I run towards my house because all I care about is my cat. Coming down the driveway I see the people from the main house being carried away on stretchers. I don't see smoke or fire, but my front door is kicked in and my cat is roaming around outside. Basically everyone that lives on my street is congregating in my driveway on my lawn. One of the firemen comes over to tell me the people in the main house were cold, so they brought their charcoal grill in the house and lit it to heat the house. Filled the house with carbon monoxide. The mom passed out, the daughter felt weak and called 911. TL. Doctor, they lit a barbecue in the house to heat it, and unfortunately didn't die from their stupidity. My neighbor of the last house I lived in had about 1/3 of his property inside our backyard because the previous tenants didn't measure correctly when they installed the fence. 2-3 times a week my neighbor raked leaves. He starts in his backyard and then drag a giant trash can to his 1/3 of the property of my yard and rake for hours. Then he'd go to the front and rake that area and walk the trash can back through our backyard and into the woods where he'd dump the leaves and yard clippings. This neighbor was so obsessed that his 1/3 of the yard didn't have grass growing from how often he raked and walked through it. And in the summer he'd mow this dirt patch. Sometimes after the sun had gone down and it was completely dark. I was out planting grass over some holes I had filled in, and I heard my neighbor yelling. He's an older guy, but big and threatening looking. Anyway, I look over and there's a groundhog lumbering around his yard. He's yelling at the groundhog to go away, but it doesn't give a shot and just keeps walking toward the garage. The guy grabs his hose from the garage and gets ready to spray the groundhog, but it starts running toward his garage because the noises scared it and it couldn't hear where they came from. I have never seen a grown man run like he did that day. He got inside his house faster than I would have thought possible. I went over and scared the groundhog out of his garage, but never told my neighbor I did it. I think he hid in his house for a solid 3 hours. My older neighbors across the street are very sweet and like to help out. But one morning when my windshield was frozen and I was dealing with it, it was just frost, not solid ice. So I was diligently SCRPing and had the heat on in my car. The man of the couple pops out his front door with a pitcher of steaming water. It was like something out of a movie, where he's just happily trotting towards me and I'm trying to get around my door around the hood to get between him and my car. I don't make it in time and he splashes an entire pitcher of hot water on my windshield. Miraculously it didn't crack. But it was still cold as duck outside, so instead of a little frost here and there I now had a solid half-inch of ice on my entire windshield. I still don't understand how an older fellow like him who has clearly lived around here for a while still thought that was a legit solution. The most idiotic neighbor I had was this woman we lived next to on a council estate. From day one of her moving in it was a catastrophe. Constant banging on the walls. Screaming. Loud music. You name it. They partied on any day of the week. The music so loud our beds would vibrate. One night we heard screaming outside on the front and I remember my mum grabbing us all out of bed and shouting there was a fire next door. She dragged us outside in case the fire spread. Our houses were all connected. So there we are. My mum, older brother, younger sister and myself stood on the pavement in our PJs. Watching while my neighbor stands in front of her house shrieking while her house is billowing smoke and all of the party goers scurry out of the doorway and down the street, leaving her to deal with this herself. Her 3-year-old son was left to wander up and down road during all of this. She doesn't call 999 herself because she's still off her twat on whatever. The fire brigade came and put it out and gave her a good bollocking about it. Turns out it was a deep fat fryer fire. They had all got so ducked up on whatever it was they were taking they had all passed out and left the burner on and the oil pan had exploded and set their entire kitchen on fire. I remember a few weeks later being in the back garden of my house and you could see through their kitchen window that my neighbor hadn't bothered to clean up the singed black wall ceiling or make any attempt to paint over it. You could actually see where fat had splattered all up the walls and burned onto the wallpaper. This same neighbor's boyfriend also once threatened to slash my mum's throat once because she went over to tell them to turn the music down. After months of having it thumping through the walls. Thankfully, she moved out after a year or so, leaving behind the blackened kitchen and doors kicked off their hinges. My neighbors bought their house 3 years ago and they have been working on it since then. No matter what day or time, they are drilling, hammering and screaming around. They even tore down most walls inside so we can hear almost everything they say or do. It drives me nuts. Talking doesn't help because my neighbor is a stubborn, racist idiot who just screams at you and tells you to go F yourself. A few days ago their house was busted by a police squad. I have no idea why, but I can't imagine it was because of their renovation noises.